Chapter 12 takes us into the world of cleaning and sanitizing. Within the chapter, we're going to talk about the correct cleaners for different tasks. We're going to talk about methods of sanitizing and requirements for their use. So for example, contact time, water temperature, concentration, water hardness, pH. We're going to look at how and when to clean and sanitize our food contact surfaces. We're going to look at guidelines for using dishwashing machines, how to clean and sanitize from a 3-compartment sink, how to clean non-food contact surfaces, how to store those clean and sanitized tableware and equipment, storage requirements for chemicals and cleaning tools, and how to develop a cleaning program specifically for your facility. So what factors affect how we need to clean whatever we're working with? Some factors that will be affected by that is the type and the condition of the dirt, the dirtiness, the water hardness of our water, our water temperature, the surface that we're trying to clean, any agitation or pressure that we put on what we're cleaning, and the length of the treatment for things to be cleaned and sanitized. So when we look at cleaners, we need to find cleaners that are stable in regular environment, that are non-corrosive, of course, safe for us to use for the environment that we're in, and of course, available for us to be able to use within our area. When we use them, of course, we want to make sure we're following the instructions that are put in by the manufacturer, using those cleaners for their intended purposes, and do not use one type of cleaner in place of another unless they're intended for the same use. All right. So we want to make sure that we are using the cleaner for the purpose that it was intended for, not as a substitute for use for a different type of cleaning that needs to be done. So when we look at types of cleaners, first and foremost is detergents. When we look at detergents, these are items that have ingredients that help to penetrate and to soften dirt, and to allow us to clean floors, walls, ceilings, surfaces, and most equipment. Now, we might also have heavy duty detergents. Those ingredients are helping to remove wax, aged or dried dirt that's been around for a long time, or even baked on grease are some things that we have for those heavy duty detergents. As a sidebar to that, you could also have a degreaser. Their purpose is not as a general detergent, but it's literally to dissolve grease that is in your equipment or on your products, as far as equipment, small wares, utensils, things like that. It works really well for burnt on grease like backsplashes, doors, rain hoods, just like you see there in the picture. It's a specific type of cleaner that is a one-trick pony, but it's really, really important that we use them so we can prevent that buildup of grease on our pieces of equipment. Delimers. Delimers are used for mineral deposits or things that can't be removed. A lot of times that's when you're looking at the hardness and the pH of your water. Happens to sometimes leave around deposits, mineral deposits. And so you see delimers used a lot in steam tables, dishwashers, and if you have steamers and stuff, a lot of times you'll also see delimers used for that to get rid of the mineral deposits that might come from the use of steam and water within your pieces of equipment. So degreasers, delimers, those are both specialty tools that you would use for specific purposes. Now, abrasive cleaners, those are good for to remove baked on foods. Those are cleaners that have scouring agents. So it helps for scrubbing and making sure that you're removing that dirt or those nastiness that's maybe been around for a little bit. It's a little tougher than what a regular detergent might be able to do. Now, the problem with an abrasive cleaner is it can potentially scratch surfaces of your product, which could be a problem down the road, especially for physical contamination or harboring of pathogens because of scratches that would be in that otherwise smooth surface. From cleaning to sanitizing. So we clean to get rid of the visible dirt. Sanitizing is to remove pathogens. So surfaces can be sanitized using heat or by chemicals. If it's by heat, the item is immersed in water that's at least 171 degrees, and it has to be in there for at least 30 seconds. You can also use a high temp dishwasher. So a dish machine that uses high temperature in order to do sanitation, or a 3-compartment sink that uses 171-degree water to sanitize the product that you're putting in it. The other side is to use chemicals for sanitizing. And there are 3 basic chemicals that we use to sanitize: chlorine, iodine, and quats, or quaternary ammonia. Okay? We need to make sure that no matter what, sanitizers are available to employees at all times, because we have to be able to clean and sanitize all of our work surfaces and our utensils and stuff for use. So when we use chemical sanitizers, we can take care of sanitizing food contact surfaces by either soaking them in a solution, or rinsing, swabbing, or spraying them with a solution. All right. And in some cases, you'll see a detergent sanitizer blend to once to clean and sanitize, use it once to clean, second time to sanitize. It's not as prevalent in commercial kitchens. You usually see those like at your home kitchens, you know, with the tubs of the Clorox wipes, those type of thing that you're usually cleaning and sanitizing with. But typically you do it 2 steps, where you are cleaning the surface of visible dirt and soil, and then you are sanitizing the surface or the product to get rid of pathogens. Now, of course, with high temp, you can't use high temp to sanitize like tabletops and stuff, because you can't soak it in water for 30 seconds at 171 degrees. So in that case, you are using typically a chemical sanitizing agent to do your sanitizing of your tabletops and such. So how's our sanitizer effective? Our sanitizer is only effective if it is mixed with water in the correct temperature and concentration. So if you put sanitizer into water and it's not enough sanitizer, it's going to make it useless. It's not going to do its job. If you put too much sanitizer in, it's too strong, it can be unsafe and potentially cause chemical contamination, and even corrode metal if you're not careful. So it's really, really important that when we are using sanitizers, that we are using them in the correct concentration that is recommended by the manufacturer. The way we can tell if our sanitizer is where it needs to be is we have to use a test kit. And so we need to make sure that there's a kit for the sanitizers being used, and you need one for every area that you are using sanitizers. So we've got sanitizing test strips for all of our kitchens that have those 3-compartment sinks, because that's where we're setting them up in. So we have 3-compartment sinks. So make sure we always have 3 sets of testing kits. So when the sanitizer is being filled in that sink, that it can always be tested to make sure it's at the correct concentration for use within our kitchen. And then you also want to make sure that, yes, you have them. Not only are you checking them at the beginning, but you're also checking them fairly regularly to make sure the concentration is still where it needs to be. If the solution becomes dirty, you want to change the chemical sanitizer, or if the concentration becomes too low, you want to make sure you change the chemical sanitizer, because if it's too low, it's not going to do its job correctly. As far as the effectiveness of sanitizer with temperature, you have to follow the manufacturer's recommendation for correct temperature. A general rule of thumb I have found from chemical sanitizers is typically room temperature, right? So in the 70s or so is usually pretty good. If you get it too hot, the chemical sanitizer loses its effectiveness and almost dissipates out through the heat, where if it's too cold, it doesn't activate and it's not going to work well either. The other thing you'll need to take in consideration is the contact time. So how long it takes for the sanitizer to be in contact with the item to actually have it sanitized. And that time is going to differ with each sanitizer. So that's why I said, I can give you estimates, but I can't give you exacts, because you're going to have to refer to your manufacturer's instructions and information for what it needs as far as specific contact time. And that's the same thing with everything, with the temperatures, the concentrations, contact time, all that's going to be based on what the manufacturer has, because that is what their job is to produce this product to actually sanitize and keep our food contact surfaces safe. Another thing that has to be taken into consideration, but something once you find out, you can make the adjustments, is the water hardness and the pH of your water itself, because you're going to need to know those and work with your supplier so you can make sure you're using the correct amount of sanitizer for your water, so it offsets any changes to the pH of your natural pH or natural water hardness. So some general guidelines. So your chlorine is said below 100 into the 75 or so is your temperature range. Water hardness can manufacturer. Concentration range anywhere from 50 to 99 ppm, which is parts per million, where they say typically less than 7 seconds contact time. Iodine, Quach, you can see temperature. If you're in the room temperature, you're pretty decent. And you're looking at about 30 contact second time. Now, again, these are some basic guidelines, but do not use them as the be all end all. You have to use them for just what the manufacturer tells you. So follow what the rules are for the manufacturer in order for it to make sure that you are doing it correctly and you're keeping your customers safe. So how do we clean and sanitize? First and foremost, we get rid of any food bits from that surface we're going to sanitize. We would wash the surface with hot soapy water. You would wipe down the surface, sanitize the surface, and then allow it to air dry. Okay, so that's the basic setup as far as cleaning and sanitizing. When do we clean and sanitize? So we need to take care of food contact surfaces and clean and sanitize them after they're used, before we work with a different type of food, after we handle any raw TCS fruits and vegetables, anytime that we interrupt a task and items may have been contaminated, or at the minimum 4 hours if the items are in constant use. You want to make sure you are cleaning and sanitizing. When it comes to equipment, of course, the biggest thing you do for equipment, follow the directions of the manufacturer. Okay. For some general steps though, for example, first and foremost, unplug the equipment. Don't make sure it's off, make sure it's unplugged, because you don't want to accidentally turn on when you are cleaning. Okay. Anything that's removable, take off those removable parts, wash, rinse, sanitize them by hand or run them through a dishwasher if it's okay. Scrape and remove food from that equipment surface. Wash, rinse, sanitize, air dry, put it all back together. You get the idea as far as, the basic steps in a lot of different instances. Equipment that holds and dispenses TCS food, it needs to be cleaned and sanitized every day unless it's indicated by the manufacturer. That is stuff that just holds and dispenses. It's not necessarily heating, it's one of those that it's anything that's a TCS, we want to make sure we're holding onto it daily. So like if you're talking about like a soft serve machine, ice cream machine should be clean and sanitized daily unless the manufacturer tells you otherwise, type of thing. So if you're using a machine for dishwashing, so you need to make sure you have a plan together, a program together to make sure you are doing it effectively and safely. First off, and this comes back to chapter 11, make sure that there's a layout and a well-planned layout for that dishwashing area and how things are going to happen. Got to have sufficient water, especially hot water. You need a separate area for pots and pans going in. You need a device that helps to indicate water pressure and temperature of wash and rinse. Make sure that you have protected storage areas that will clean and the tableware and utensils. So you have an area to hold those things once it's all done. And make sure you train your staff to operate and maintain the equipment and the use of those chemicals correctly. You can have it all set up and it all can be great and ready to go, but you need to make sure the staff knows how to actually use it and have training to use it correctly. So dish machines have a couple of options. You have high temp machines and chemical sanitizing machines. If they are a high temp machine, then the final sanitizing risk has to be at least 180 degrees in order for it to be sanitized. Now, for a stationary rack single temp machine, it's 165, but you don't see very many single temp machines that are under the high temp. They're typically a two-stage where it starts at a lower temperature and then goes to that 180 for the high temp. Now, chemical sanitizing machines will clean and sanitize at a lower temperature, but you have to add chemicals in order for it to do the sanitizing itself. So again, like I've said before already, you want to follow those temperature guidelines provided by the manufacturer. So basic guidelines, follow the recommendations as far as the manufacturer, clean the machine as often as needed to make sure it's running correctly. Make sure you scrape items before washing, use the right dish racks, never overload the dish rack, and make sure we are air drying all items. Make sure whether it's a dish machine, 3-compartment, what have you, that we're always air drying those items. We never want to towel dry because then we could potentially reintroduce bacteria that we've just cleaned off. So you always air dry your items when they are dry. Make sure you're checking the machine's water temperature, water pressure, sanitizer level on a regular basis. And if there's an issue, make sure you take corrective action. Make sure that for a high temperature machine, provide those tools to check the temperature of the items being sanitized. So a maximum registering thermometers, temperature sensitive tape, something so you can actually make sure that the inside's going where it should. And that's an example. You have a maximum registering thermometer is that picture there. They run it through the machine on a cycle. And then when it comes out, it records what's the highest temperature that the water actually got to. So it doesn't do instant read, like where it goes up and then goes down when it comes up. It holds it at whatever that highest temperature is. So you know what the internal temperature was at that time. So you're setting up a 3-compartment sink. You should have clean and sanitize each sink and drain board, and then fill the sink. Your first sink is with hot soapy water, okay, detergent and water. Second sink is clean hot water. Third sink is water and sanitizer. All right. You should also make sure that there's a clock with a second hand that's readily available. So when you are sanitizing, you can use that second hand clock to know how long it has to be in the sanitizer itself. So 3-compartment sink is, basic steps. So most people think when you're doing a 3-compartment sink, you wash, rinse, sanitize. No, the first thing you do is scrape the items. So you want to get all the extra food off of the items because you don't want that food to necessarily go into that wash water. If you do, it's going to make that you have to change that water over more often. So your best thing is to pre-scrape or do like a real quick pre-cleaning to your stuff before you wash it. Then after you scrape the item, then you wash, rinse, sanitize, and then air dry. So if when we're working with tableware and equipment, we want to make sure we're storing that stuff at least 6 inches off the floor. We are cleaning and sanitizing drawers and shelves before we're storing them. We store glasses and cups upside down on a clean and sanitized rack or a shelf. We don't want product getting into it. Plus it promotes drainage so we don't have standing water going into it. Anytime we're storing flatware or utensils, make sure they're all being stored handles up and all the same way, because we want to make sure that when we're grabbing them by the handles, not by the eating implement side of it. Clean and sanitize trays and carts that are carrying tablewares and equipment, and make sure we cover the food contact surfaces of stationary equipment until we're ready for use. So if we're not using the piece of equipment, we want to make sure that we are covering them when they're not being used. So when we're cleaning, we can use wiping cloths. Wiping cloths are used to pick up food spills, wipe down equipment. We have two types. We have wet wiping cloths and dry wiping cloths. All right. So make sure that we don't use cloths that are meant for wiping food spills for any other purpose. So if it's meant to clean up a food spill, don't use that cloth for something else. Okay. So a wet wiping cloth is for wiping down surfaces or counters. We store it in sanitizer when it's not being used and change it when necessary. You always make sure that your towels are being kept in that sanitizer solution when they're not being used, because if not, we can potentially allow bacteria to grow because we don't have it in that sanitizing solution. Making sure we keep cloths that come in contact with raw meat, fish, and poultry, keep those separate from other cleaning cloths, right? Keep those separated out than those ones that we'd be using for wiping down any other non-raw meat products. So dry wiping cloths are used to wipe up food spills from tableware. Those are kept dry while in use and cannot contain visible food debris or visibly dirty. So a dry wiping cloth is what you see there in the picture of the expediter that is wiping down the plate, making sure everything looks good before it's going to go. You're not going to use that dry wiping cloth to then go and clean and sanitize a table. Or you're not going to use a wet wiping cloth that you use to clean and sanitize a table to then turn around and wipe the edge of a plate before it goes out to the guest. You know, you don't want to interchange those. So if we're talking about non-food contact surfaces, floors, ceiling, walls, equipment, exteriors, things like that, we want to just make sure that we're just doing regular cleaning to prevent dust, dirt, food residue, or debris. We don't want to have any growth of pathogens on it or allow any pests or anything. Even though it's a non-food contact surface, it still needs to be cleaned just from that visible standpoint. So there's no visible dust or nasty stuff that goes along with it, or it doesn't accidentally come in contact with anything else that could be considered pathogenic or anything along those lines. So what happens if we are responsible and we have to clean up after people get sick? Because if you run into instances where there's diarrhea or vomit, we need to make sure that's being cleaned correctly. Because both of those can contain norovirus, which we already know through previous chapters are highly contagious. So we want to make sure we are nipping that in the bud and making sure that we are not potentially spreading that virus around. So the way we do correct cleanup, it helps to prevent contamination of food, spreading illness. There needs to be a written procedure for cleaning up vomit and diarrhea, and the procedure is specific, and you need to be trained on those procedures. We do actually have a written procedure in the kitchen as far as if there was somebody that vomited or had diarrhea and it needs to be cleaned up, and how that actually works. And that is something that each facility is required to have, and then making sure you're training staff on how that takes place if it happens. So now it's time to store our tools and chemicals. You've heard me say it before, but I'll reiterate again. Make sure we're keeping them in a separate area away from food and prep areas. So when we store our chemicals are stored at a much different place than where we store our food and prep. So you're not going to find our chemicals stored in the same place that our dry storage is at, right? And if it is, it's in a totally separate area of the dry storage. That storage area for your chemicals should have good lighting so they can be easily seen. They should have hooks for hanging cleaning tools, utility sink for filling buckets and washing cleaning tools, a floor drain for dirty water are things that you should be looking at as far as a place for your chemicals for storage and such. So when you're storing, we never clean tools and sinks that are used for hand washing, food prep, or dishwashing. I talked about that before, but just to reiterate it again, you need to make sure that those sinks that are for hand washing are just for hand washing. Those are for food prep are just for food prep. Those that are for dishwashing are just for dishwashing. We should never dump mop water or other liquid waste into toilets or urinals. That's what those service sinks are for. That's where that waste all goes. It doesn't go into any other drains besides those. Of course, when we are using those chemicals, like I've said before, make sure we're only using that are approved for us to use. Do not keep chemicals that we're not using. There's no reason to have chemicals on site if you're not using them. Make sure you cover or remove items that could be contaminated before using those chemicals. So if you need to use those chemicals, make sure wherever you're using them, food is not in that area because we don't want to contaminate them. After using the chemicals, clean and sanitize, and then making sure you're following the manufacturer's directions and the law when it comes to those chemicals as well. Ideally, we want to store those chemicals in their original containers, keeping the chemicals separate from food, equipment, and utensils by either spacing them away or partitioning them from other items as well. And we always store chemicals below food, equipment, utensils, and linens. They're always down at the very bottom if they happen to have to be in the same area. So as far as chemicals labeling, the manufacturer's label has to include directions for use and be clear enough to read. Now, if you transfer the chemical to a new working container, the working container must be labeled with the common name of it. All right. So if you're going to transfer some bleach water using chlorine into a spray bottle, you need to make sure you label that bottle with what it is. Right. Bleach water, chlorine, sanitizer, something like that. So it's easily understood what it is. So nobody has a misconception and tries to use it for something else. So if it's stored outside of its original container, it needs to be labeled so people understand what it is. Finishing up, developing a cleaning program. We need to, in order to put a program together, we have to first identify what are our needs. Then from that, we have to create a schedule as far as when things need to be cleaned. Once we have a schedule created, you train your staff to follow it as part of their daily routine, and then monitor the program to make sure it works. So it's fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of making sure you're going through those steps and then following through. So to identify cleaning needs, we need to make sure we look at all surfaces, tools, and equipment that need cleaned, identify those tasks. When you're getting in that phase, talk to the people that are on the ground floor, ask for input. Look at ways that we can improve those procedures if we're not doing it as effectively as we should. Estimate the time and skill for each task so you kind of know what the expectations are when it comes to each item. Then from there, you create the schedule, what should be cleaned, who should clean it, when it should be cleaned, and how it should be cleaned. Right? All of those come together as far as creating that schedule. Pardon me. From there, we choose what materials we're going to use to clean with. So select the tools and the cleaners according to that master clean schedule, making sure as a supervisor you are replacing tools that are worn and providing any protective gear that may be necessary for using those chemicals and such. Of course, to get it started, it's always good to have a meeting to introduce the program, schedule time for training, make sure you're actually setting aside time to train properly. And of course, this gets into management stuff, but motivate the staff. Yes, it's something that has to be done, but how you go about doing it, how you go about motivating your staff can make a difference in stuff that is being done regularly and with enthusiasm, and those that are being done only because they're being watched and they have to do it and they feel that, oh, this is this task I have to do. So, going in and finding ways to motivate your staff for these things can also make a big difference. Once you've introduced, then it's time to monitor, making sure you're supervising the routine of cleaning, checking that things are being done, making sure if the schedule needs to change because of menu change, procedural change, equipment change, And again, ask the staff for input upon the program. Are there areas that can be improved upon? Are there processes that we can improve how it gets done so it's done more effectively? How those can all come together can make a difference. So cleaning and sanitizing, again, another important part of the process. Looking at the specifics as far as what we do, temperatures, concentrations, things along those lines, all extremely important. And we want to make sure that we are doing this on a regular basis so we can make sure that our areas that we are working at are going to be cleaned and sanitized for our customers so we can make safe product for them to consume.